The balance sheet in accounting only measures things that are reasonably like calculatable, right? That you can actually put a dollar term on. But we know that the well-being of your life or of a country, of a society, there are lots of things that don't have easy economic value that you can put on there. Like what's the cost of trust, agility, joy, love?
Before we get into the show, I'd like to say a huge thank you to our sponsor, First Human, of which I am a co-founder. First Human is dedicated to extraordinary impact in the world through exceptional leadership. So if you're looking to elevate the leadership of your team or your organization, then do check us out. We also offer one-to-one coaching. So if you'd like to get coached by me or one of my extraordinarily talented fellow coaches, then head over to firsthuman.com. And with that, back to the show. And we are live with another episode of Being Human. I'm delighted to say I'm here with James Rhee. Wow, when it comes to introducing you, James, there are a number of qualifiers that we could use here. You're a Harvard Law graduate. You currently teach at Howard, MIT, and Duke School of Law. You're a private equity investor. You have a wildly popular TED Talk, as well as a conversation with Brené Brown, and you're the author of this book, Red Helicopter, which I've read, which you've now developed into an operating system and a mode for doing business, which is, well, it's just extraordinary having read the book, and it offers us a very it's an inspired way of conceiving how we do business, conceiving how we lead in business. So I'm extremely excited to delve into this parable that you've written and eliciting some of the wisdom that you have to share for our listeners.
Well, hi, and hello from Boston. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
No, it's great to have you here. So for those who've not familiar with you, haven't heard of you before, always love to ask my guests if they could fill us in a bit on your backstory, where you grew up, what your parents were like, some of your formative experiences to ground what we'll delve into in terms of your business and leadership philosophy.
Sure. Born in New York, first person in my family born in the States. Parents were immigrants from war-torn Korea. Both were caregivers. One was a pediatrician, one was a nurse. It's in my genes, like giving care. Humanist, studied lots of different things in school, mostly like politics, philosophy, economics, using that terminology for your UK-based listeners.
Right.
And went to law school to be a public defender and learned systems, not necessarily for corporate law, but understand that too. And then spent decades, still do, investing private equity, and so learn money, how to use it, but always through the prism of a humanist. That's why most of the things I've invested in are both rational and irrational, like they're brands, emotional ties to brands. And then, these days I'm father of 3, I'm married, I've got a dog, and I don't know, I don't fit in a box. I think, I teach, I invest, but I generally just, I give care. And sometimes it takes in the form of words or a hug, but sometimes in the form of money too. And that's generally been my life. It's sort of a lateral life, not a vertical life. And I'm in a lot of different communities. So, yeah.
Right. And so there's an interesting juxtaposition there. Somebody who's dedicated to giving care, and I can confirm that that's true. Certainly based on the book. So somebody with that orientation, how do you end up studying, law? That doesn't seem like the obvious choice for somebody with those kind of, sensibilities or values.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all learning these days that the law governs money. Right? For a while, for the last 20, 30 years of sort of easy fiscal policy, we forget that money is a social compact, right? It's a construction of humans. It used to be that money used to be backed by, hard metals, but for the last 50 plus years, it hasn't. So it's a figment of imagination, right? It's like we all agree that this thing that we call money is worth something. So law transcends money, and I think we forgot that. And so that's I knew that when I was younger. That's why I went to law school, right? Because law school is about how we design human behavior, like what sort of behaviors do we want in a society. But I forgot that very important lesson during many years of managing money, and then I realized that over the last 10 years.
Right. Well, that probably brings us to the pivot point in terms of this book, Red Helicopter, and that's when you were asked to take on this US retailer, Ashley Stewart, who obviously very familiar in the US, may not be familiar in the UK. But should we pick it up from there? How you end up running that company?
Sure. I was in my early 40s, so I wasn't a boy anymore. So young man, father, had lived enough of life to know that most of the things you learn in school are modestly useful, but that life is very different than what you learn in school. And I had a dying father, and I lived the American dream. But things were bothering me about where private equity was going, the detachment of social capital from financial capital. I think the industry got increasingly calloused just about humans, about people who want to just feed their family and have their kids go to school. And so it was happening back then, 10, 11 years ago. And again, I'm a politics, philosophy, economics major, taught high school after Harvard, right? So it's not like I was put on this earth to maximize billions of dollars of wealth for myself and buy an island. I have no interest in living apart from people. Anyway, and so there was a company called Ashley Stewart, which no one knew of at all. It was a business that was one of the largest businesses servicing and employing predominantly Black women, plus-size Black women in the United States. And that's certainly a demographic that it's not easy, I would say. I don't think the systems are designed for these women to thrive very easily. I think that's fair. And they reminded me of my mother. I'm sort of thinking about their legacy, looking at my aging parents. And my mom's life in the United States was not easy. And I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised by how poorly this company was treated for 20-something years. I was just disappointed at how it was described in board meetings and in Wall Street meetings. You can imagine the terms that were used. And I had an issue with it. So anyway, I said something, and I wasn't asked to. I raised my hand. I said, well, I knew the company was 6 or 7 weeks away from liquidation. So I just raised my hand and said, I'm an experienced investor, very experienced in distress, that maybe I could just go down there for 6 months, avert a liquidation, find someone to take over the company, and then I'd come back. And that's not what happened. And I can stop there. And you can imagine it was a lot of death of identity, death of ego, death of a lot of things. But for 6 months, it was pretty lonely. And not many people came to help. And it was just me and the women. And it ended up being 7 years, partly because no one came to help. And partly because, I made a promise. They had sort of said, ride or die. And I said, sure, that's what we'll do. And rest is history.
Right. And you put your hand up. I'm really curious there. Was it, what do you think the real underlying driver compulsion was there for you to be, okay, I'm going to do this?
Well, I think it's why I structured the book the way I did. I'm reminding everyone that work is a very small subset of your life. And remember that, right? You want to live, don't be the person at 90 years old who says all the things that they regret, because we all know what 90-year-old people say on their deathbed. I mean, your life is your life. And work is hopefully a very sustainable and complementary way to live a joyful life. It's a subset of your life. I think particularly men forget that, and they have very little hobbies and friends, which the data all shows, which is why men are increasingly miserable these days. But yeah, my life, I'm a former high school teacher. I am the son of 2 caregivers who I was raised this way. I was not raised to be a megalomaniac wealth hoarder. That's not how I was raised, nor do I want to live like that. My first job out of Harvard was $12,600 as a high school teacher. It's just not how I am. And I think most people are actually generally like that. And like they want to have interests and have a decent, balanced life. And like it's the keeping up with the Joneses and the comparisons, particularly with TikTok, that make it almost impossible now. But yeah, so life supersedes work. And so that situation, even though it was in a work environment, I was troubled by the way that this company was treated, because as an experienced investor too, I knew that it was being misvalued for non-financial reasons too. And you know, from reading the book, 5-6 years prior, I resigned from one of the most prestigious Boston private equity firms, basically rejecting what could be conceived as a bribe to stay. And I chose not to, and I left unemployed. So if anyone who's listening, and I think most of the world knows me, know this, I ain't buyable. Like, there's no price.
Right.
Yeah.
So something deep down stirred you and thought, I can make a change here?
No, I think it was more like, let's give this a shot, a fair chance. I was very realistic. The company lost money for 20 plus years, had no Wi-Fi, was like, I've been paid a lot of money, invest a lot of money, right? It's not like I'm not Pollyanna that's sort of walking around. I live in the real world, but I knew that the company had not had a fair opportunity. Like I knew, and I thought for 6 months I could try to stave off liquidation to present a fair shot, a fair presentation of the company to the capital markets, right? That I could say, is this really what the company could do if it had a chance, if it had the money, if it had Wi-Fi? The company could do this. Would you please listen? Would you please pay attention? And please listen. And after 6 months, the entire world said, no, James, we don't want to listen. We don't believe you. We don't want to. And I think it was compounded by the fact I was a man, unfashionable man, a Korean American, unfashionable man with no retail operating experience, and the women were Black. I don't think that the world, could even fathom that. They're like, how could that man and these women get along? Right? It was not just the economics of it. It was sort of the visual, which is a sad statement, right, on the world. I mean, we're all citizens of the world. I mean, we're having this conversation in the context of some pretty dire and sad hatred and global hatred. It's just not the life I've lived. My wife is Caucasian. I have biracial kids. And, I chair entrepreneurship at the most prestigious historically Black university in America. And it's not the way I live my life. I've traveled the world, lived in lots of countries, and I don't know, like, it's disappointing.
But what's interesting to me is you go in there thinking this is a challenge of presentation, and I can present this company in a different way, and what it becomes is something very different. It becomes a leadership challenge, right?
Well, I think leadership is presentation, right? I think that presentation and language, and the book is an expose on defining language very carefully, right? So language is not just English, Italian, French, and things like this. It's also language is math, language is music, language is, emotional language. There's lots of different languages. So when we say presentation is a sort of sister to like communication, right? So my job, and great leaders, I think, do this, was to communicate the value of this, not just company, but the underlying community supporting this corporate entity that we call a company. My job was to create an environment where the women could just speak freely and communicate what the value was of their relationships and the social capital and the brand. And and so I was able to do that because I speak a lot of languages, right? I speak the law, I speak private equity and growth. I speak distressed. But I think most importantly, I speak, like emotional language and humanity. And that's why it's very important for the readers of the book to understand that even though I was nothing like what the women thought that they needed, I grew up with a woman very much like these women. It was my mother. Like I know the language of quiet leaders who do everything and get very little credit. Immersed in that language my entire life.
And that helped you to relate to these women. And okay, so you're communicating with them, you're opening up the space for them to talk about, the business and where it's at. And
Yep.
What do you start to observe? What do you start to detect?
Yeah, that clothes have nothing to do about the brand. That the whole ethos of the business, its only reason for being was that it created, it was a set of connectivity, right? That it was just a safe place in a community for these women who sometimes they need a break. They do everything and they don't have a break. And this was a place. And that shouldn't shock your listeners, right? Like most great brands, if not all, like the real product is not the actual product that they're selling. Like Apple is not phone, right? Disney is not an amusement park. I mean, this is brand 101. And so, yeah, I was like, for 20 years, you all have been sort of building a business plan around the wrong thing. You think it's fashion. I don't. And for 20 years, you failed. So do you want to perhaps try this? And so we built an entire mathematical and sort of emotional system around what I thought was the real brand, which was this, it's friendship, it's relationships, is the thing that most of us in the world increasingly do not have anymore, right? It's becoming increasing just a simulation. I mean, and that's why, you have rampant loneliness now and despair. And I think we were at least 10, if not 20 years ahead of the world. I said these things in 13. Like my job as an investor and as a student of history is to make predictions, and people didn't believe in the future that I was saying. And I think in 2024, the reason why all the attention is being given now, Ted, Brene, Simon, all of these things, the best-selling book, is because I guess we were right about where the world was going.
Right.
And instead of sort of, gloating about it, I'm offering the world a solution. Like, here's an operating plan for your life, your brain, your emotional health, and financially. Here's a solution for what ails you. Give it a go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you identify that the product isn't the clothes. It's something else. It's about the role that these stores serve in their community for the women that they serve.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big P product. But then you also talk about an operating plan that isn't what we would normally consider a operating plan to mean, especially coming from a private equity investor.
Yeah.
So what are the facets of that plan?
I mean, I think this is what I teach in both classrooms, but in boardrooms too. And, MIT didn't invent the term systems thinking, but they did invent something called systems dynamics, which is a mode of analysis of systems thinking. And fundamentally, the chassis that I put into this company, but everything I do, including my life, right? There's a reason why I just came back from Korea and, visited my dad's tomb, right? It's, everything is built on loops, on open feedback loops. Nothing I do is planned linearly. In order to create maximum leverage and scale and to conserve energy and to make 1 minute into 10 minutes, which is a times a finite input, it's a constraint, is that you have to sort of design businesses and lives in reinforcing loops. And so there are very few things in the world that compound forever. Most loops in nature and in our lives are closed, meaning like you go to the sink, fill up a glass of water, turn off the sink, drink the water, it's done. there's certain things that compound forever. So one of them, which is why Einstein called it the eighth great wonder, is money. Money compounds forever in most environments. And then my other belief is that goodwill, acts of true kindness, relationships, these are generational. They compound forever too. And so for me, like if you're able to design your life or a business, which is just an amalgamation of lives in a commercial setting, that's all it is. If you're able to design systems that sort of align those two loops, why wouldn't you? And I've done that not just at Ashley Stewart. I've done this in many, many different companies, right? That's what great brands, I mean, and to talk in money terms, it leads to higher retention of people. It leads to higher customer engagement. It leads to not spending and wasting money on ineffective top of funnel marketing. It leads to true organic growth. You just have to be very intentional about the loops that you create, the kindling wood that you put on them, and you have to have a longitudinal view on what success is, on returns. So most great companies, they last for a long time.
Yeah.
In many different iterations, right? Increasingly over the last 10, 15 years, because of the money cycle, we reward very short-term successes. And we say, oh, you created a unicorn. Well, you raised $1 billion to create the unicorn. You still don't make money. But we view that as success. I guess it is success for some who get out early, but from a longitudinal perspective, from, a societal perspective, are they successful?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So let's talk about those then. So with Ashley Stewart, what were the loops? What were the kindling wood? What was the kindling wood? And what was that longitudinal perspective?
Well, I think that it was, I try to do things in barbells. So like I focus on two ends of a barbell. And so if you're listening to this, you can picture a barbell in a gym where you have the middle of the barbell doesn't touch the ground. It's just the two ends. And so the first loop that I always focus on is sort of the big picture capital P product, right? So getting that right, that messaging right, that it was about communion, community, fellowship, safety. These words like this, these are not taught in business schools. These are taught more in med school, right? Or in some of the social sciences, which, remember, like business is part of humanity. Social sciences do apply in business, no matter what they try to tell you in business school. And then if that's the goal, that's the capital P product, the other end of the barbell, it's the very small blocking and tackling and the actual math that reinforces what you want to accomplish. And so in the book, I tried to teach deconstructed accounting and finance theory using a lemonade stand. Right? It's a real reminder that things like accounting, which are sort of made up measurements, that they're not in the laws of physics, right? That accounting is a man-made measure, and it's measuring what we want it to measure. And so instead of using accounting, you use math, and one of the closest proxies to math and finance is cash. And then the other one is making sure you measure correctly. And this is, it's people. I spend most of the book very subtly just undoing a lot of the things that you take for granted, that you think are right. It's not right. It's what groupthink and easy learning thinks is right, but it's not right. So what's the real origins of kindness? What is math, right? Maslow's hierarchy, not right what you think it is, right? GDP, the founder of GDP said, don't use it as a proxy, but we do anyway. And so a lot of the conventional thinking that people throw around, thanks to a lot of, profit-oriented people, they bastardize what's true. And so that's the cautionary tale I'm saying to people in the book. Think about this. This company, the perception of it was that it was a failure. They were wrong. It was a failure on the measurement by which people were using. But I believe that in the true math of it, the value it was truly creating, it had a lot of value. And I had to do it myself to show it to people. And that's why I was CEO for 7 years, not just a passive investor, right? Like I had to do it. And lo and behold, the world was wrong. We were right. And we created a lot of value. Both, it's still compounding right now, like the best value, human value. And it's a story that's giving a lot of people hope as they look for a different paradigm in which to live. But let's be very clear, economically, we crushed it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a ton I want to dive into on the success around this. But to come back to the lemonade stand accounting, one thing that really stood out for me was, there's a visual in the book of the balance sheet and the talk about how you look at assets and liabilities from this perspective.
Yeah, sure. First of all, most people, the vast majority of human beings live on an income statement. Right. And when you read the FT, the Wall Street Journal, sales are up, net profits this, it's just income statement. And think about your personal life. How much money do I make? Right. What are my expenses? I mean, it's income statement. GDP is an income statement measurement. And that's one way to look at it, but it's very one-dimensional and short-sighted. The real value of a life well led or a company that has longevity is its balance sheet. Your balance sheet does not lie. If your life has created value, or if you are a saver versus a spender, whether you're an individual or a country, your balance sheet doesn't lie, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that the balance sheet in accounting only measures things that are reasonably calculatable, right? That you can actually put a dollar term on. But we know that the well-being of your life or of a country, of a society, there are lots of things that don't have easy economic value that you can put on there. Like, what's the cost of trust, agility, joy, love, your health, your physical health? What's the expense? What's the unstated liability of the dissolution of a social compact, which is happening in a lot of countries? What's the cost? These are balance sheet items that are not actually measured by standard GAAP or international accounting standards. That doesn't mean they're not important. You don't have to. So I measure them. So why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I measure that? As far as I can tell, most companies are still comprised of human beings. And most companies still provide a service to human beings. And that may change in the era of AI, like in 20 years with the singularity. But that is a social policy thing. Clearly, I'm raising and saying, what are we going to do? So that's what it means to measure on a balance sheet, and then being careful not using accounting rules to measure your balance sheet.
So what are you measuring then on the balance sheet, James? People listening to this saying, okay, well, how do I go about this?
Well, a lot of we're not going to cover this in a 40-minute podcast. You can take my 45-hour class in university, or you can, call me. And if you really want to, it's not a simple lesson, right? Because you have to really understand things and then master them enough to deconstruct them, right? And then say, here's where it's not working. But I gave a couple examples in the book, but I mean, one thing that I would nudge people to think about is one other source of data that doesn't lie is your actuarial data. It's boring, right? Who wants to talk about insurance? No one wants to talk about insurance. It's a boring expense item. It's not revenue. But in my mind, in many companies, I've had my ownership in, close to 50 companies at this point. Actuarial data does not lie because it shows you how people are behaving, right? If you say we're doing great by our employees, we have top-notch safety operating protocols, your actuarial data can either confirm it or prove you to be a liar, right? Your healthcare data, your workers' comp data, your general liability data, it's how well are you dealing with risk, right? And so these are people-oriented risk data. I take a look at these first and foremost, because beyond the financial statement, which can be manipulated to say anything, actuarial data actually shows you how people are behaving every day, like every second, every hour. You can't lie about it. That's what I look at. I've always done that in terms of the health of an organization, health of a society, always.
And I know that in the book, you were awarded an actuarial award, right?
Yeah, we won the highest award in workers' compensation actuarial rewards or whatever. Like, it's not like I wrote, it's not like winning the Oscars, but it's the thing I was most proud of, because you have to think about the sort of seriousness of it. So first of all, you have to think about a bunch of quants coming into my office. And I'm a quant too, right? I mean, you know me at this point, I'm a bit of a romantic musician as well, but like I'm a quant. And so they would say to me, we've never seen behavior change like this happen, like ever. And I sort of shrugged at them, and they're like, how do you do it? And I said, well, kindness and math. And I wrote in the book, I wish I had also said, to actually bridge kindness and math, that means you have to be a hell of an operator, right? So that's number one. And then number two, the significance of it is also, it's metaphoric. I said to them, actuarial data, like accounting data, only measures history. And so I'm an investor. I don't care about history. I'm informed by it, but my job is to sort of predict and make money in the future.
Yeah.
So you can live in the past. I don't want to. Like, I'm living in the future. And so, great. That history was terrible, but that was under a different leadership. That was under a different operating system. And so I'm glad that you are now seeing the results. And so think about that, right? Think about it in the context of something like artificial intelligence and sort of data streaming. A lot of the algorithms are being used on historic data.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This book is an anthem about what's possible in the future, unencumbered by history.
Yeah. And profiting from a compounding return on kindness.
On humans. Yeah. Like, I'm an optimist in human beings. I mean, sometimes people...
Well, it's human beings operating in a system of kindness, it seems to me. Right? Just having faith in human beings being good, it isn't what you're saying, is it?
No, it's not. Because we are capable of very good things and bad things, right? So, and that's been the subject of philosophers we've all read, and neuroscientists now, right? We just like the philosophy of the 21st century is neuroscience. Your point well taken, right? So I am optimistic in designing systems that nudge people and bring out better behavior from people, and then rewarding them for that and creating feedback loops that reward people for that. And, I'm calling in from Boston, but, UK was no different. It's sort of a lot of the origins of all this came from the UK. But let's think about like the feedback loops and the reinforcing loops of like civics, democracy, economics, and education, free markets. Those three feedback loops created economic and societal miracles over the last 300-400 years.
Yeah.
Those are systems design, right? The U.S. Constitution is a design of systems. And the issue is that sometimes these feedback loops, by definition, if they compound for too long, it leads to certain imbalances, right? Maybe wealth imbalances or things like that. By definition, if you're not careful, it can become unseemly, right? Unbalanced. And it happens every 70, 80 years in world history, right? It often leads to like global war or civil war or revolution, right? These are things that are happening. That's where we're living in right now for the last 10, 15 years. That's what we're all debating right now. Like, what do we do? I don't think it means kiboshing everything and saying everything's stupid and like everything's terrible. That's not true. And so that's why the book is written as a parable. in a lot of ways. People, I don't have to say this, but I'm going to say it because why not? I released the book this year on purpose because I want people, that cafeteria that's in the book, it's a metaphor of your life, your country, your company. And even though it seems all hope is lost and people are angry and like there's chaos, and we had that too. And so when people say it's not possible, I say, no, it's possible. You should have been with me in August 2013. You want to know impossible? And we didn't approach it with anger. We didn't yell at anybody. Like, I talked about kindness in math, and I asked a lot of questions. I asked for help. And I tried to explain to everyone that there's a collective we here, and we can either fail together or succeed together. But we're not going to, if we don't have truth, which is kindness in math, then we have no shot. And so it's a metaphor for handling chaos, right? Or when you have despair, which is what is happening. People have despair these days. So when you have despair, and hope, loss of hope is the number one cause of suicide, whether individually or organizationally. When you have no hope, then you don't invest for the long term.
Well, you played Here Comes the Sun, right?
I did. Yeah.
But that, in terms of injecting hope,
yeah,
that's a good illustration of what you were bringing to that environment.
They were expecting some big speech after this miraculous thing where I finally raised money somehow and called in favors from my friends because the whole world said no. And the first thing I did, I had this crappy little laptop with crappy speakers. I put it on a crappy aluminum chair, and I played Here Comes the Sun. And it's a beautiful song, but it's so simple, and the words were so meaningful. On the other hand, like most simple things, which I write about in the book, simple is very complex, right? To really sort of make things simple. Here Comes the Sun is a very complicated song. It was George Harrison's, like, his first song after coming back from India. And it's composed in pentatonic, and it's kind of half like Western music, half Indian. And so the notes that he's using, the chords and then the chord progressions, they're very Asian too. And so it sounds really simple. It's not. And for that reason, I still think, I may be wrong now, but at one point it was the most downloaded song on Spotify in the world.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's such an important, and hope is so, is so important. And then you said something interesting. You said truth, which is kindness and math. Yeah. Why is truth, kindness, and math?
Because, like when you're in a position of chaos, and let's just forget Ashley, let's talk about the world for a second, right? Because we're all living in the world. I mean, you can pretend like you're not being impacted at work, but that's just not right, right? What do you have? So, like, kindness in that order. So, and when people read the book, they'll know that kindness there's a real secular meaning to that, origin to that word. It's what Rousseau and Adam Smith and John Locke, they talked about kindness. It's about investing in someone's agency, right? It's why kindness was so important to free markets and to democracy, right? It's agency. It's realistic assessment of agency. And so,
hang on, just to pause you there. So, kindness is realistic assessment of agency. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an investment in someone's agency. It's 350 pages to understand what kindness is, right? So you have to immerse in it. That's one of the reasons why we gloss over kindness, because instead we watch these stupid YouTube videos on random acts of kindness. And that's how we're teaching people now. That's not what kindness is. There are treatises on these things, right? There's entire reams of philosophical underpinnings of our economic and social systems. But the society we're living in now, we don't read, right? People want 8 seconds of wisdom on a phone. It's just not how it works. It's not how things work. So, so that's kindness. And so my lens is, why would I do anything that was not conducive to humanity? You're not going to catch me making investments in businesses that appeal to or create bad incentives for people to hurt themselves. There are plenty of ways to make money doing that. I choose not to. And everyone has to make their own choice, I guess. Those businesses that do create negative externalities in the past, they should be taxed because you and I are paying for it. The second thing, math is math, right? Math is science. Math would exist even if there were no human beings on this earth. Math exists. And math is very humbling. And so I think most great mathematicians are actually incredibly creative. Like Einstein, if you think about the perception of Einstein as a type A left side brain quant, I think it's wrong. I think Einstein was one of the most creative people that have ever lived in the world. He saw realities that no one could see. And he taught it simply. And so kindness in math, it may seem very simple. It's not. But those are two decent foundations I found to base not just a life on, but a business, right? Is it conducive to humanity? Are we creating positive externalities? Check, right? Are we, in MIT speak, I would say, are we governing this company with distributed decision-making? Right? I can use like terms like that, and I don't like using like slogans, but yeah, that's distributed decision-making. What do you think that is? That's agency. Like it's encouraging people to be accountable for their decisions, right? And having the courage to make them. And most great organizations are like that. And math is math. Math is not accounting. Accounting is a bastardized form of math, using math, but it's not math. And so my math as an investor ultimately is always how much cash did you put in, how much cash did you take out? Those are called internal rates of return. And so anyone says, oh, does it work? I was like, yeah, over 30 years, I think I've returned over 160% per year to my investors. Pretty good.
Yeah. Well, on this podcast, we've had numerous examples of businesses who lead with, well, in your terms, kindness, distributed agency, and achieve enormous returns.
Yeah, think about why you don't use the word kindness. I mean, it's not common, right? I mean, I don't want to spend the rest of the time. It's not niceness. And when people read the book, they'll understand that. But kindness, some of the reasons why we don't want to talk about it is that some of us still think we kind of live in junior high school, right? It's like, oh, it's not cool to talk about kindness. I'm like, oh, then I'm not in the business of being cool. Like I went to junior high school many years ago. My business is to sort of live a life that I'm proud of and that my kids will be. And my job when I'm managing someone else's money is to make them top-notch financial returns. And so whether or not kindness is cool or not, I don't care, right? If kindness is delivering ridiculous alpha, then I will keep talking about it and teaching it. And so anyone who wants to really just get to the truth of the matter and be successful, then talk about kindness. But if you think it's uncool, it's kind of suit yourself.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really appreciate you using these terms. It reminds me, are you familiar with the work of Bob Chapman?
Yeah.
And his book, he uses the term caring leadership. But it's in a similar vein. I know we're coming up. Yeah, we're coming up on time here. One of the things that you talk about in the book, and you relate it to this idea of counterpoint in music, is this idea of three songs.
Yeah.
There's the song of Ashley Stewart, there's your song, and there's a third song. Talk to me about how you use this concept of counterpoint and apply it, in this case to Ashley Stewart, but in general to the business context.
Yeah. I mean, first, I think we should define counterpoint, because I'm going to guess most of your listeners are not like music theorists, right? So it's so counterpoint, again, another word that has a meaning that you would think is not what it is. So in counterpoint, the vernacular is aggressive, right? Or a disagreement. I counter your point. Counterpoint. It's not what it is in music. In music, it means when you have multiple streams of melodies playing contemporaneously, And so for instance, like in a piano, usually the right hand plays the melody and your left hand plays the harmony. And then you create that sound. In counterpoint, the right hand plays a melody. The left hand plays a melody as well. And then together, the two melodies create a third melody. And if you think about it from just, forget business for a second, because most of the teachings I'm doing in the book, it's like master this in your life, and then you can apply it to business. Like if you can't master it in your own life, then you're not going to be able to do it in business.
Yeah.
Like most great friendships or relationships or marriages, they're in counterpoint, right? So one person has a melody, the other person has a melody, and you sound better together when you're singing together, and you have to sing your melody in a way that doesn't diminish or diminish the melody of the other, because then it's not in counterpoint. And so that's a judge for me as someone who is a musician in my head. I listen, like that's how I hear things. I'm like, is this a good relationship? Because what's not a good relationship is where one person sings melody all the time and one person has to sing harmony. That's not a mutually beneficial relationship in the long term. So when you apply that theory of counterpoint to like work and life, I tried to do things in my work that sound good with my life and vice versa. And by doing that, you create these reinforcing loops, right? Like they supplement each other. I try not to do things at work that would embarrass me in my family room when I'm speaking to my children. I don't want to be that person. These are all, again, personal choices, right? But you do that too often, you develop scar tissue,
Yeah.
And particularly as for you older listeners, you know what I mean. Younger ones, you may not understand, but as you get older, you do. It gets heavy after a while and you become unhappy. And then so at work, same thing, like if you think about it, just like your colleagues, you try to create environments where people can sing their melody, but that it's part of a broader orchestra. That doesn't mean you can sing anything you want. If it's hurting everyone else, come on, you can't do that. And then from a brand perspective, same thing, like you hear every brand has a different sound. You have to hear the sound. That's what I think great brand people do. You hear the voice or you hear what it should be. And you encourage that brand to sing that song well. And I think as a leader, as anyone involved with a good brand, while you're in the process of helping that brand or someone else sing their song, what happens usually is that you get to sing your song better too. And that's what happened with Ashley Stewart. I was very intent on these women being able to sing their song. I thought it was a beautiful song that they let me in on during those very difficult first 6 months. And they reciprocated. They heard me very clearly too. There are many reasons why they should have and could have rejected me, right? And wasn't black, wasn't female, wasn't anything but they saw right through me. They said, "We think you're the right guy." And I said, "Thank you. I think I may be too. I really may be."
You're singing the right song.
And I sang my song, and that's and now the world is really starting to understand those two songs together, and they like it, right? That's why Ted, that's why Brene, that's why it's all happening. They're like, "We like that song. It sounded good." And I said, "Yeah, it was a good song. It was honest, and we weren't perfect, but we tried. It was honest."
And maybe it's because there are so many dissonant songs out there and so many out of tune.
Yeah. And
people are now really recognizing this and pulling for it.
Yes. People are tired of, like, it's all disingenuous, right? Not all, but it's noise. There's so much noise, right? Like everyone's singing this, that, and like, they're not doing it because they care. It's like a short-termism gain and people pounding their chests. And I think the life that most of us want to have, and I think sustainable lives and sustainable companies, again, just equating the two, it's hard, but like simple songs that are honest, that tell the truth, they generally win over the long term. And it does cut through the noise. And that's one of the wagers or investments I'm making, is that the world is just tired and beleaguered, and that we don't trust anything we're hearing anymore. And that's why the story of the red helicopter, right? Why, Ashley Stewart as a song, people liked it. And we had people from all walks of life pulling for us. Every race, every gender, every age, every industry. They pulled for us because they wanted to be part of it.
Yeah.
And that's what Red Helicopter is, right? Think about it from an ecosystem. It's an operating system. It's taught at Howard. It's taught at Duke. It's taught at MIT. It's taught at a ton of schools. I teach at a ton of companies. I invest in a ton of different entrepreneurs in many different countries. Books being translated into multiple languages. It's young people, old people, men, women. It doesn't matter. It's just a song of humanity. And that's, I think that's why the book ended up having to be very simple, deceptively complex, and it ended up being a parable. That's why it ended up.
Like Here Comes the Sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, deceptively complex. Yeah. That's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's refreshing to hear people talk about business in these terms. I've done hundreds of podcasts now on this topic of leadership and business. And yeah, it's so energizing to hear this language being applied.
We all want it. And people ask me, is it possible to do it on massive scale? Is it possible? How about just focus on you making it a possibility in your direct ecosystem? You do it. You can't worry about everyone else all the time. Just you do it. And you'll see what happens is that if you do it, people will come. And people are just really, a lot of them are seeking permission to do what they intuitively know to be right.
Yeah.
It's just, and I have a lot of faith in people in that way. I think people deep down intuitively know the answer, except we're taught often to doubt it. And I think a lot of the shortcomings and the reasons for that, it's because of, the business schools and the pedagogy in business books. And I didn't write a typical business book. I refused. Is it a business book? Sure. Is it a life book? Okay. Is it, it's a lot of different things.
A music theory book.
Is it music theory? Is it a memoir? It's a lot of things, right? But I think that, I think it's a fallacy. People do this to sell things. I wasn't going to write a book that said, here are the 3 things you need to know in this order to be successful. That's just condescending. It's just not how life works, right? Life is complicated. There are lots of little decisions, lots of little hidden systems underneath, and each of us has to sort of make our way through it and do the best they can. The book is meant to give permission, some hope, but also a way of thinking that people can see the underlying systems, that they can connect them for themselves and make the best decisions for themselves and their people. And that is fundamentally why the book is about agency. So I had to write it in a way that actually gave agency versus giving people a list and telling them to listen to what I had to say. I just refused to do a book like that. And I don't think that's what real leadership is, by the way, either. So, yeah.
I've had this experience of talking to you on the podcast and before the podcast, as you articulate. I mean, like real time.
I can see you.
Yeah, it gets my cogs spinning in a really good way. But I think it's because you're articulating yourself in a way that is challenging. It is multi-layered, and you are bringing in different perspectives simultaneously. And it's as if I'm being introduced to a kind of different way of exploring information, exploring theories, and so on. And so, and I think that you're right is not the norm in how people present information today.
And it's like, in that way, it's giving you the space to make decisions and come to conclusions that you want to, and your time. And I think when you make those connections yourself, then you remember it, and that's real learning, and it's applied learning versus memorization. But make no mistake, if you think about the design of, like, I'm American, so let's just pick on America, the design of systems, civil liberties, democracy, free markets, these were all based on systems theory, right? It's based on agency. So this is the very fabric in which, if your listeners are mostly business people, this theory in which a free enterprise is based on this thinking.
Yeah.
Right. And so during times of like inflection and change, it's oftentimes best to go to first principles, right? To say, where are we right now? And that's why in that chaotic cafeteria, when the whole world was laughing at us and like it seemed like all hope was lost, whether you as a listener are experiencing that as in a company or as a citizen or as a human, however you want to, that's why during that time, instead of getting mad, or you just sort of like have to smile a little bit and say, listen, let's define what kindness is. Let's define what math is. And let's agree that agency is important. Let's start from there. And then let's build on that and the things that create those things, that create those feedback loops. I think that is a helpful framework to think about your life of your business, or the business that is your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we're up on time here and you've got other commitments, but thank you so much. Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate not just the message, but the medium, right? The way in which you're articulating your message. It's it's refreshing, and you're absolutely right. You're putting the agency back on me as I contemplate your material, and that's what you're inviting your readers to do.
Yeah,
and that's
And you might need to like reach out to me. It's like, if you want to talk, let's talk about it. Like, it's not, there's no perfect answer. And I'm curious. It's been really genuinely one of the things that has been the most, like the last 10, 11 years, like, and in the book, when I got yelled at by my employees because I didn't ask for help during a week of a lot of personal crisis. Yeah. Like, I used to not ask for help. And because I thought that was somehow weak. And I really realized at that moment, which I'm not going to spoil, it's not weak. It's to ask for help. It's strength. It's confidence, actually. And that not asking for help is weak, and it's insecurity. So for people listening, and reach out. I'm curious to see what you think, what your experiences are. And it's been one giant learning experience for me the last 11, 12 years. I'm having a lot of fun.
Well, you make an important point there, because you sort of seeded this kindness, right? And you pumped agency, if you like, into the system. But then you became part of that system, and you had your own healing journey as this whole system you injected energy into started to have an impact on you. That's
a reinforcing loop. And
when you were getting the flowers, and you get the feedback from your mom about what the employees, it all kind of comes. You're the effect of that loop.
It's an investment, right? I mean, it's an odd investment. Kindness is an investment, though, and that's why the TED Talk is about goodwill, because goodwill is sort of that intangible asset that comes from those investments. Except the sort of mind bender of it is that if you're intentionally being kind to get something back, then that doesn't work. You have to have faith in a system. You have to invest and hope and say, this is good. And then it does come back to you.
Yeah, it does.
In the oddest ways. It does.
And you started with a modicum of vulnerability when you first came in, and then it all came back to you and sort of almost forced you to be even more vulnerable and continue your own opening.
I just got an email this morning on LinkedIn from a executive now, but he lives in Spain. He was my student in 1994. And he wrote a post today, like nearly 30 years later, and saying, hey, this was my former history teacher. You should read his book. And that took 30 years, that feedback loop to close. And I get things like this all the time. And it's, as you get to a certain age, you and I are not, in the front 9 of our lives anymore. And let's say early back 9. The investments come back when you least expect them. And it's awesome. Like, it just as a life, it just feels really good. And it gives you hope, and in a time when I think we could all use some.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thanks again, James.
It was fun.
Thank you. We'll put the link to the book. And the associated website. Anywhere else you would send them, James?
My website, and give the book give it a good push. I think what works best is more personal, it's your personal reaction to the book, these things, and people, it's nice, it's spreading in the way that I wanted it to, just very quietly, one. It's really makes me happy, actually. So because it was a fight with the publisher, what's Red House? What is this? I'm like, well, they'll come.
Yeah, and I've probably read, in excess of 100 business books, right, for this podcast. This has got to be in the top 2 or 3 in terms of most moving, most impactful on the way I think. Well, I'd say that as a prediction somewhat, because I think some of the pennies are going to drop over time. So if that's any endorsement, for the book, for my listeners, then go ahead and get it. Get a copy.
Please be sure to keep in touch, and as you think through this, and send me an email. After you think about it, and sort of let's stay in close touch. And then I have friends and people that after I get to know someone better, I literally listen to them. I'm like, and then I generally will make an introduction to another 1 or 2 instrumentalists that sound like you a bit or different, and then I'm like, you guys would get along well. Think about it. So
great.
After a little bit, send me an email and let's keep in close touch. And I'll be in London. Are you in London?
I am actually recording this in London right now. Yes, so I'm in London a lot. Yeah.
Is that where you live?
I don't live in London, but I spend a lot of time in London.
So I will be in London. I think Q1 of next year. I think.
Okay.
Just to do some meetings, but also maybe a book reading, just a discussion, right? And so I'll give you a heads up.
Yeah, I'd love to join that.
Yeah. Cool.
Great. Okay. Thanks once again, James.
Yeah, it was fun. It was great meeting you again.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Bye.